This is Franchise Today, brought to you by FRM Solutions, providers of the best-in-class software solutions for franchise relationship management. Franchise Today is your destination for weekly information, conversations, and interviews with accomplished industry leaders, all of whom share best practices for sustainable growth and sensible franchising. Here now, your host, Stan Friedman, to kick off this week's podcast.
Today is Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. I'm Stan Friedman, and this is Franchise Today. Well, the clock's ticking. Hope you've gotten all your last-minute holiday shopping done. In just another 2 blinks of the eye, this holiday season will have both been here and gone, and it will be onward to 2025. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty upbeat about 2025. I know from polling my inner circle that not everyone is pleased with how our elections turned out, but most everyone I talk with does agree God's got a plan, and we'll just have to let it play out, won't we? On a different note, what about that Jimmy John episode last week? Say what you will about that guy, and many will, but there's no denying the size of Jimmy John's heart. It's the 3rd time I've played that interview in the past 5 years, and I just don't get tired of hearing it. It's almost like Miracle on 34th Street, or It's a Wonderful World, or A Christmas Story. You know, those Christmas movies that never wear you out. Well, except for the ones that run on 24-hour loops. But you get my point. Some things are timeless, and that's how I feel about that Jimmy John interview. For those of you that may feel differently, worry not. It's going back into the archives for at least the next couple of years before I may trot it out again. Today I'm pleased to revisit another conversation that I featured last year at about this same time, when Jason Pfeiffer, editor-in-chief at Entrepreneur Magazine, joined me to talk about the 2024 Entrepreneur Franchise 500. This year we'll talk about the upcoming 2025 edition, which drops in just a couple of weeks. But I'll do that with Tracy Stapp, Herold, Entrepreneur Special Projects Editor, who leads the charge and the team that produces the Franchise 500 each year. But first, a quick time out here. But don't go anywhere. I'm coming right back to make introductions.
Franchise Today will be right back. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Franchise Today is brought to you by FRM Solutions, offering the only CRM tool built exclusively for franchising that lets you have it your way. Whether you're a single brand needing professional tools across departments or a portfolio of brands needing franchise-specific CRM across the enterprise. Either way, FRM satisfies the needs of many with the power of one. That's right, one single instance of FRM is all it takes across departments or across brands. So if you've had it with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRM, end your frustration today. FRM offers robust dashboarding, tailored reporting, and with open APIs, FRM pushes, pulls, and integrates with other databases, providing you with a single source of truth. Don't just take my word for it. Visit them at frmsolutions.com and order up a demo today. Tracy Stapp Herold is the special projects editor at Entrepreneur Magazine. She works on franchise and business opportunity stories and listings, including the annual Franchise 500, one of, if not the most anticipated publications each year. It is franchising's equivalent to the Oscars, the Emmys, the Grammys, albeit minus the red carpet, but it is the big deal of the year when it comes to ratings. So, what goes into that pot of stew? How many data points are included, and how are they massaged, measured, and weighted? How much, if any, has the changing nature of franchising in recent years influenced the curation of the data that drives the 500? Not that long ago, on the street side, our business model was more mom-and-pop, operator-centric with what were typically founder-led brands. Today, it's not unusual to see franchisee enterprises that eclipse many franchisor organizations in size and infrastructure. Massive mumbos, multi-unit, multi-brand operations across dozens, if not hundreds, of locations. And on the Zor side, we see tons of roll-ups, portfolios of brands dominating specific verticals and service areas, led by divisions and subdivisions of private equity sponsors, replacing those founder-led concepts of yesteryear with the power of professional management, deep pockets for growth and investment, igniting the economies of scale like rocket fuel. I think it's safe to say that our corner of the world, franchising, is a changed place. No longer your dad's old Buick, which means What's important in 2025 to the compilation of the Franchise 500? It too must look different, or does it? Here to answer that and talk a whole lot more about it, Tracy Stapp Herold, editor of special projects at Entrepreneur Media. Tracy Stapp Herold, welcome to Franchise Today.
Thanks so much for having me, Stan. It's great to be here.
I feel like I'm talking to a rock star because I've known your name for as long as I've read Entrepreneur, and your name is up there with some of the greats in franchise world, and somehow I've never had a chance to meet you or even speak with you before today, so I'm feeling very privileged to be here too.
Wow, well, that's very flattering. Thank you. But it's nice to meet you finally as well.
So why don't we do what I do every week with my guests? We always start out learning first about who we're talking to and how they got where they are, because we all know franchising discovers us. We typically don't go looking for it. So yours is a particularly interesting story. Why don't you tell us how right out of college you landed where you landed?
Yeah, so I was an English major in college. I went to UC Irvine and actually interned at Entrepreneur while I was still in college for about a year. I was just an editorial intern, kind of doing a little bit of writing, editing, mostly fact checking. And I actually sat on the opposite side of the cubicle from the people in the franchise department. And at the time, I remember hearing them working on the Franchise 500 and thinking, I would never want that job. But graduated from college, was looking for a job, not always easy out there for an English major to find something, and saw that there was an opening at Entrepreneur. And so I applied for it. And they had an opening for a writer, and they had already filled that position, but they said, hey, we're actually looking to fill another position in the franchise department. So I went ahead and interviewed for that, and they liked me and they hired me. And that was 21 years ago. And I have been here ever since. So started as an intern, then editorial assistant in the franchise department. And now 21 years later, well, for quite some time now, I've been the special projects editor for Entrepreneur magazine, where I mainly handle the franchise rankings, including the annual Franchise 500, which is about to have its 46th annual ranking this January. And then we do multiple other franchise rankings and franchise related rankings throughout the year based on the data that we collect through that.
Just roll off a few of those. What might they be?
For instance, we do fastest growing franchises. We do top new and emerging franchises, top franchises for veterans. We started 6 or 7 years ago now, our top franchise suppliers ranking, where we honor the third-party service providers that help franchisors and franchisees in various categories. Yeah, we do a lot of different rankings.
How large a department are you that amasses all of this information?
That's a difficult question. The primary department is me and my assistant. We always hire some interns to help with the Franchise 500 and sometimes with other projects. But we have people from many other departments that also contribute to it. And we have a project coordinator now also who helps to kind of keep us all on task and make sure that we're getting everything done that we need to. So maybe 2 or 3 of us that are kind of the primary department, but many other people from other departments contribute to what we do.
So I wanted to ask today about the construct of the 500 and how over the course of 20 years that you've been involved with it, it's changed. And literally the magazine and publishing business has changed dramatically as well. Why don't we start with that? How different is the world that you're in today than it was when the magazine was what I would go chasing every month on the newsstand? Many people now find digitally. That wasn't an option back 20 years ago, was it?
Yeah, very different, obviously. I mean, even just in the way that we compile the Franchise 500 now, there are a few people at Entrepreneur who have been around almost as long as I have. And when we get together, we will always kind of laugh about how it used to be when we were receiving all of the applications and FDDs by snail mail. And at Franchise 500 season, our desks would just be surrounded by stacks and stacks of FDDs because, as you know, they're pretty thick documents. Of course, now everything is done digitally. So we have a digital form that the franchisors fill out, and they send us a digital copy of their FDD and all of the other information that we require in order to rank them. So obviously it's a completely different world just in that way. And yeah, the publishing industry has changed a lot, and just the way things that are done in the publishing industry, but also the focus obviously has shifted a lot to online. We still very much care about the physical magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine. That's part of our brand. And I'm very proud of the magazine that we put out. We have a fairly small, spunky editorial team that puts together this magazine. It's now 6 issues a year, but we really put out a quality product, I believe. But there is always, yes, that consideration of online as well, and trying to make sure that those two worlds are working together. So it's a very, very different world than when I started 21 years ago in publishing.
And the title has expanded to Entrepreneur Media, correct?
Yeah, well, the company has always been Entrepreneur Media, or at least as long as I've been there, it's been Entrepreneur Media. So in addition to the magazine and the website, under Entrepreneur Media, you have books that we publish. We're now doing several podcasts, and there's multiple different ventures under that Entrepreneur Media umbrella.
So let's stay focused on the one that we're here to talk about today, and that's the Franchise 500. And my question to you, my big question to you today that we want to unpack and talk about is just how different franchising is from 20 years ago. It's been since post-COVID, I think, there's been a huge and rapid acceleration of brand consolidations and roll-ups and portfolios and private equity sponsors dividing and subdividing by product category or vertical and buying up every brand they can in that space. Things have changed, and it's not your dad's old Buick, as I said at the beginning of the episode today. What are your thoughts on how that looks, and how do you accommodate the changes that have to go into the curation of the 500 based on all of those different data points that are different than they used to be?
Yeah, we've definitely seen, especially there's so many multi-brand companies now, multi-brand franchisors, and smaller franchisors usually just seem to last a few years before they're either gone or swallowed up by one of these multi-brand companies if they're just a single brand. So it's a very different franchise industry than it looked like when I started out. I don't recall there being a lot of these multi-brand franchisors. I mean, they always existed. You always had Yum and brands like that had multiple franchise brands, but we're definitely seeing trends towards that and private equity. And it's very interesting to see. As far as how that affects the Franchise 500, we do try to look at our ranking formula every year and make sure that we're keeping up with the times and evolving the formula as needed based on what's changing in the industry. I don't know that we've made a lot of changes specifically towards that, but we're definitely aware of it. And we've made changes here and there, never anything major all at once, but we try to, like I said, slowly evolve the formula as we go along each year and are paying attention to what's happening with the results and with the franchisors that we're seeing.
I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's grab a quick break, and then when we come back, you can't tell me the secret sauce. I understand that, but I'm hoping that you can shed some light on what are some of those data points that matter most, and
Absolutely.
How do franchisors that are new and emerging find their way into the spotlight when there are so many large brands that are capturing the attention of the publication. We're talking today with Tracy Stapp Herold, Special Projects Editor for Entrepreneur Magazine. And that makes her the person in charge of putting together the annual Franchise 500, which for anyone who's been in franchising for more than 20 minutes, you know how important that January issue of Entrepreneur is. We're weeks away from the 2025 46th annual Franchise 500 hitting the shelves, and we're lucky enough to have Tracy here with us today to talk a little bit more about it. This is Franchise Today. I'm Stan Friedman. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't go away.
Franchise Today will be right back, but first, a word from our sponsors.
Franchise Today is also brought to you by Profit Keeper, the #1 franchise analytics platform for franchisors and franchisees. Trusted by more than 150 brands and 50,000 franchisees, Profit Keeper connects KPI, benchmark, and royalty data from your locations, groups, and territories. With Profit Keeper, you see stats in real time, presented simply and graphically. This makes it easy to identify actionable information for franchisees to help them drive profitability and brand growth at the unit level. No more wrangling data and guessing what works and what doesn't. To learn more and to get started, visit profitkeeper.com/franchise today. And the conversation continues with Tracy Stapp Herold, Entrepreneur Magazine's special projects editor, and that makes her the person in charge of the oh-so-coveted Franchise 500. So is that kind of heady to be the person who assembles that Bible? Because that's what it's become to many people that are aspiring to have a great year ahead in franchising. Nobody wants to go backwards on that list, and everybody wants to get on it and progress and march forward. So what are some of the magical criteria? I know you can't give us the algorithms or the secret sauce because it is pretty closely held, but what are some of the things that matter most? Because some franchisors think, oh, you just pay to advertise, and the more you pay, you get into the magazine. But any of us that have been around for a while know that that's anything but true.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because, we put a lot of work into this. We consider it big responsibility to make sure that we are doing our best to represent all of this data accurately and to rank everybody as fairly as possible. So, like you said, our formula is proprietary, so I can't get into, real nitty-gritty details, but we have what we call our 5 pillars that we kind of look at, which is the 5 general areas that we try to look at. And within these 5 areas, we're evaluating more than 150 data points. So when I say we're looking at costs and fees, we're not just looking at one cost data point. We're looking at multiple data points under that. So we look at costs and fees. We look at size and growth. We look at the support that the franchisor provides to their franchisees, the support and training. We look at brand strength, and we also look at the financial strength and stability of the franchisor company. And those pillars are each weighted differently, and the data points within each of those pillars are weighted differently. But we really try to get a holistic view of the health of the franchise and the opportunity that the franchise is offering and how well the franchise is doing at the moment. And it's, I think, important to emphasize too that size and growth, like I said, is one of those pillars. And it's certainly an important indicator and an important thing that we look at, but it is definitely not the only factor that we look at. So being big is an advantage for sure. Growing a lot is a positive sign of possibly healthy franchise, but we try to look at many other factors to try to determine who are the best franchises out there.
What about unit level economics? I was at Wing Zone way back when, probably 20 years ago. We didn't have an item 19, but we made the 500. So I know you can do it. But what does that look like?
Yeah, ROI and unit level economics is something that we would love to be able to include in our ranking formula. But at this time, we do not because, as you know, item 19 is still voluntary. So we don't have any way to reliably gather the data in order to compare systems based on unit level economics. The other problem is, even if we were to look at those franchisors that do include item 19 data, as you're probably aware also, there's not any standardized format to that item. They can put whatever performance data they want to in there. It can be from their top franchisees. It can be from their full system. It can be just from their company-owned units. It can be for the full year, or it can be for a month. It can be just about anything. So we would be comparing apples to oranges to pears, unfortunately. So it's always something that people ask about. It's something that we would love to be able to use in our formula, but we have not felt like there was a fair way to do a comparison based on that data point.
Do you have a segmentation of the 500 that says 50 or 100 will come from emerging, or 50 or 100 will be legacy? How does it break down to make it fair and equitable across the entire landscape of franchising, from the emerging newer companies all the way to the legacy brands?
That's a great question. I mean, we don't have like a certain number that we are trying to hit or anything like that. But one of the things that we do in in kind of comparing and breaking down our data is there are some data points where franchises are compared to not to the whole set of franchises, because it would not necessarily be fair to compare McDonald's to a brand new franchise that just started as far as size goes. So we will, for some data points, we'll compare franchisors based on size groups. So if you're this size, and again, I can't even get into the exact numbers, but this is just an example. If you're under 50 units, you'll get compared to other franchises that are under 50 units. If you're thousands of units, you'll get compared to other franchises that are thousands of units. And we also break down the comparisons in the ranking formula in other different ways, like based on costs. So if you're in a certain cost range, you'll get compared to other franchises that are in that cost range. If you're in a certain category, you'll get compared to franchises that are in that certain category. So all of the quick service franchises would get compared to each other. All of the commercial cleaning franchises would get compared to each other under certain data points. So where that makes sense, we try to compare apples to apples and not necessarily compare a giant franchise to a brand new franchise. That said, the giant franchises do obviously have a big advantage because they've got that brand strength. They've been around for years. They've got the size. They're probably growing. They probably have really good financials. Probably, usually. But we do get a few, usually, franchisors that are new and emerging that make it into the Franchise 500 every year. And I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but it was actually a decent number that were 10 years or less old that made it into the Franchise 500 this year. I want to say it was maybe 80 something. And I could be completely wrong on that. So I'll double check it after I get off of this call and let you know. But the part of the reason that we do our other rankings throughout the year, besides the Franchise 500, is to try to recognize those franchises that maybe don't do as well in the Franchise 500 or don't even make it into the Franchise 500 because it is so competitive. And so that's part of why we have our top new and emerging franchises list, where we recognize just those franchises that have been franchising for 5 years or less and really try to shine a spotlight on them. So there are some of them that make it into the Franchise 500. I believe we had 2 this year that just started franchising in 2023 that made it into the top 500, but it is very competitive. And so we like to give them their own recognition and their own list as well with that top new and emerging.
From a trends perspective, Tracy, we talked in the green room before we started about how much franchising has changed post-COVID especially. But from the days of founder-led brands to what today is just private equity gone wild, what else do you see from a trends perspective that you're taking note of?
Yeah, I mean, even some of the most well-known founder-led companies like Jersey Mike's now are getting bought up by private equity. Or
Peter Cancro couldn't say no.
Understandably, we've all gotta retire sometime. I don't know if he's going to still be involved or not, but yeah, definitely we're seeing that. And large franchise or multi-unit franchisees, I know, are becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And I think we focus a lot of our editorial on the smaller or startup franchisees who are only running 1 or 2 units, but we definitely are trying to recognize more and more in our editorial coverage that multi-unit franchising is becoming much more of a trend and definitely a path to wealth for a lot of people. And we're seeing the effects of that in the data that we're seeing with that's coming in for the Franchise 500 and how that is affecting the rankings as well. One example would be Burger King this year. I believe it was their largest multi-unit franchisee, sold all of their units back to the company this year. So we saw all of a sudden Burger King's franchise units dropped, but their company-owned units rose significantly. And of course, when you look at what the company is planning to do, where they're planning to remodel all of those units and resell them, there's probably a time when our formula would have dinged that more as seeing, like, oh, they lost a lot of franchise units. I think we have evolved it to the point where it somewhat recognizes those units weren't really lost. They are still there. And And now there is an opportunity with those units for people coming into the system or possibly other multi-unit owners wanting to add to their portfolio to open new units, buy those units from the company, which is, I believe, is what Burger King is planning to do. They're planning to remodel them and then sell them. And so that's really creating more opportunity there. And so, yeah, we're seeing the effects of that. As far as like trends, I mean, we're seeing categories of franchising that maybe we couldn't have even imagined existing a few years ago, such as mental health services. And one of our new categories this year is going to be autism treatment services. And so we're seeing a lot of interesting things where it's just proving that you can really franchise just about anything. And it's just a very powerful model still.
What about the impact of AI? What are you seeing there?
That's a good question. I mean, we did feature on AI, I believe in the January issue last year, actually, on what was AI going to be used for in franchising and what kind of impact was it going to have. So we're seeing that franchisors are starting to embrace different ways that they can use AI, both in customer experience and at the corporate level. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing to see how AI is going to evolve the industry and who's going to embrace it and who's going to push back against it.
Both in development as well as in support, I imagine there are both tracks to consider. Well, Tracy, we're coming around the final turn here. Before I ask you for contact info so people can find you again, what have I not asked you that you might wish I did?
That's a great question. And it's a question that I always ask people when I interview them, and yet I wasn't prepared for it.
Well, you don't have to have an answer. If you don't have one, don't worry about it.
I would just reemphasize again, like you said before, this is not pay for play thing. If you look at like our top 10 franchises, a couple of them might advertise in the magazine, but certainly most of them don't. They don't need to. And we work very hard on this. And if you are a franchisor and you don't already participate in the Franchise 500, we want you to participate. We want to have this to be as comprehensive and robust a picture of the entire industry as it can be. So, and if you're a little guy or a new guy and you're thinking, well, it's not worth our time, please, it is worth your time. As I said, even if you don't make it into the Franchise 500, you still have a chance to be in that top new and emerging ranking and multiple other rankings that we do throughout the year. You will be published in the Franchise 500 issue. We list every single company that applies for the ranking, even if they don't make it into the top 500 in that January issue and on entrepreneur.com. And that's just a great opportunity to get your company in front of potential franchisees. And I think to those potential franchisees, I would also say, while we work hard on this Franchise 500 and do our best to try to identify what we think are the strongest franchise opportunities out there, what is going to be the best franchise opportunity for you is not going to be based on a number that we place next to a franchise company. It's going to be based on your needs, your desires, your skills, your talents, and your goals. And I mean, we had over 1,300 franchises apply this year. So only 36% of them make it into the top 500. And that does not by any means mean that those that did not make it into the top 500 are bad franchises. There are some that I would absolutely encourage people to look into if they're interested in buying a franchise. So explore the entire list, not just the ones that ranked, and look for what franchise is going to meet all of your needs and your wants for a business. And don't worry too much about numbers. Even though we love our numbers, it's a tool for you. This issue is intended to be a tool for you to be able to find the franchise that will meet your goals.
I think that was very well said. I think it got me thinking a bit about another dear friend in the franchise world, Rebecca Monet, who puts out the Oracle Spot On Assessment Tool. And there are some franchisors that people that are looking to get a franchise, they'd be better served in a product category or in a vertical, working for a more mature brand or some working with a less mature brand. And that doesn't make either of the other a bad brand. If somebody's got a propensity to be able to still have their hands on the clay, they'd want to work for an early stage franchise company where they make a difference and they're dealing every day with the founder, that may make them a much better operator than if they were going to a McDonald's working with field personnel and training people that are hourly employees and they'll never meet the franchisor.
Mm-hmm.
So in either case, it's not a bad thing. It's just what's better for you as an individual. And I think that that's the same thing here, that a brand doesn't make it into the 500 doesn't make them a bad brand. They're still right for somebody, and they're right for somebody who's got that spot on assessment that says, I know I want to work with a younger company. I want to work with a company where I can be part of the growth, and not quite enough to be in the 500 yet, but they're on their way. Maybe next year, maybe the year after. So I think that's a very good point that you made. And I think that you sharing out to the audience that if you didn't apply this year, knucklehead, don't miss it next year. Get in here and do this.
Yeah, reach out.
Well, I know it's a busy time getting ready for the drop in January. What's the issue date?
It's January 14th is when the issue will hit newsstands and when the Franchise 500 list will go online.
Awesome. Well, Tracy, it's been great getting to meet you and talk with you and learn more about the inner workings, and, backstage pass is always a good thing to have. I enjoyed meeting you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure meeting you as well and talking a little bit about what we do.
Tracy Stapp, Herold, Entrepreneur Magazine Special Projects Editor. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Remember to subscribe to Franchise Today so that you never miss an episode. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and everywhere you chase podcasts. Or ask Alexa, Siri, or Google to play the latest episode, or find us at our home, www.franchisetodaypodcast.com, where you can drop me a note, make guest recommendations, or, of course, leave a review. Please do. Until next week, when I'll be back to do it all again, I'm Stan Friedman wishing you the best, the very best of all things franchising, and Franchise Today is out.
Franchise Today is a production of FRM Solutions, providing best-in-class CRM tools to empower relationships with prospective and existing franchisees. Find them online at frmsolutions.com. Join Stan every Wednesday at noon Eastern for another episode of Franchise Today.
When it's PCS time, you know the drill. Pack, research the new base, get the kids in school, because family supports family. At American Public University, we support military families with flexible, affordable online education that moves with you. As a military spouse, your tuition rate is the same as your partner's, just $250 per credit hour. American Public University, education that moves with you. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.